Hello, everybody, and welcome to the fourth year of the WIT stream at GSE. So this is our first session, which is 4AA, and it is sponsored by Macro 4. Before I introduce our wonderful speaker today, I am going to do a little bit of housekeeping. I think you probably all know most of this, but just to be sure, please remain on mute. Now, you're all coming in mute and off video, and will remain that way until towards the end of the session when Claire can take questions. And if you would like to unmute yourself and ask the question, with a group this small, I don't think we're going to have a problem. Please remember that there are social media contests on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter. You can retweet to @GSEUKC. And the hashtag is hashtag GSEUKC 2021. The charities are the Guide Dogs for the Blind and RNLI. So all donations gratefully received. They're both really, really good charities. This session is being recorded. The session slides are available from the website. If you want to put questions in the chat during the presentation, please feel free to do so. And please, please, please remember to do your feedback via either the link in the BYOA, the Bring Your Own Agenda, or by using the QR code that Claire has so beautifully displayed on the screen there. So welcome again to the first session of the Women in IT stream, 3 ways to put equity at the forefront of retention and recruitment. Our speaker today is Claire Connor, who is a mainframe and IBM solution architect. She influences strategic and tactical decisions throughout the business, focusing on driving value for her clients through efficiencies and modernization. She joined Ensono in February 2020, following 7 years at IBM. So over to you, Claire.
Thank you. So yes, as you just said, I'm Claire Connor. I'm a mainframe and IBM solution architect with Ensono. Obviously, career-wise, about 8.5 years, 9 years working with the mainframe. It feels like a long time, but also definitely not quite long enough. But one of the things that I really like to focus on is actually outside of work. I have a very active life, and I think that is really important to do, especially in the last 2 years where everyone's been quite a little bit secluded. So I try and keep myself very active, doing all sorts of other things as well. So not everything revolves around work. So I'm going to start off today by what do we actually mean by equity? And there's quite a big difference between what equity means and what equality is. And you've probably heard equality used a lot in the last decade or so, especially when it comes to hiring and recruitment. And fundamentally, the difference is equality means providing everybody with the same amount of resources, regardless of whether they need them or not. Whereas equity is sharing those resources based on what the individual needs in order to adequately level the playing field. As you can see from this slide, I've kind of given a bit of an indication using the graphs on the right-hand side there. I think this accurately represents it. If you give everybody equally 2 items of a resource, you still have that inequality. Whereas there may well be some individuals or groups that need quite a bit more assistance just to be able to level that playing field based on what resources or abilities they have at the beginning. So that really is the difference between equity and equality, and I think that's an interesting thing to note at the beginning of this. And one example of how to explain this is a story that I read online a few months ago. So everybody gets a plaster, and I really like it. So it's a way as a school teacher tries to explain equity and fairness to her 7 or 8 year old class. So what she does is on the first day of school, she asks her students to raise their hand if they've ever scraped their elbow. Obviously, all the kids put their hands up, and yeah, absolutely, everybody's fallen over and scraped their elbow. She picks on one of these kids and asks them to share their story on what happened. At the end of that, she then takes a plaster and puts it on the kid's elbow. She carries on and then asks the question, of the whole class, has anyone ever bumped their heads? Now, obviously, everyone has as well. And so she asks, she picks on another kid, asks them to share their story. Oh, when did you bump your head? Oh, okay, well, thank you. I'm so sorry that you hurt your head. And here's a plaster to put on your elbow. Now, obviously, the kids all start looking a bit confused. Well, why are you putting a plaster on my elbow when I bumped my head? But she kind of passes over that, carries on. So then she asks everyone, has anyone ever fallen over and scraped their knee? Yes. Okay, new kid, tell me the story of how you scraped your knee. The story comes to the end. Oh no, that's really bad. I'm really sorry you scraped your knee. Here's a plaster for your elbow. Now, obviously, all the kids are now really confused. Why do they, you've bumped your head, you've scraped your knee, why do I need a plaster on my elbow? So at this point, the teacher takes a step back and she opens the discussion about how she's been absolutely fair. She's given every child the exact same thing. So every single one of them has had that plaster applied to their elbow. The fact that it was only useful and helpful for one of the class, and it was entirely pointless for the other children in this story. It really wasn't helpful for them. So what she says is that fair doesn't mean that everyone gets the same thing. Fair means that everyone gets what they need to be successful. And I think that's really, really important. And she uses that for if one of the kids needs to have an extra snack because they're diabetic and the other kids don't get that, or someone with autism maybe needs noise cancelling headphones, or one of the kids with ADHD needs a fidget spinner in class to be able to concentrate better. Well, actually, that really manages to make the whole class more accommodating for those individual needs, and they realize why they don't always get the plaster for their elbow if they don't need it. Then I figure if we can manage to explain this to 7-year-olds, we should be able to understand this as adults as well. So moving on. Why is equity important? And everybody needs a different level of support. I absolutely love this cartoon. I have seen it so many times over the year, but it does say it. For a fair selection, everybody has to climb the tree, right? Everyone's taking the exact same exam, but you're never going to succeed if you're a goldfish who's being asked to climb a tree. Now, it really highlights that every person has individual strengths and weaknesses, but if you always judge someone based on the same standards, they're not necessarily going to be able to show their true potential. So being able to accommodate the different experiences and skills and natural abilities of the individuals, if you don't do that, you're really missing out on something when it comes to building up your team. So why is it important to have a diverse team? So as you can see from this cartoon as well, again stolen from the internet, these are all six blind men all feeling out an elephant. You can see that they're all touching different areas of it. They're seeing entirely different things. If you're standing at the back pulling on the elephant's tail, he thinks it's a rope. But if you put feeling up his tusks, then it feels like a spear. Now, brilliant. Obviously, each of those individual people there are seeing an entirely different perspective of that elephant. Now, why you would want to include a diverse team is that by pulling all of these different perspectives together is the only way that you're going to be able to manage to see the whole picture. So every team member has different life experiences to draw on, and where they're standing today could absolutely give them a different view of the same situation. What we need is to have diverse teams so that we can see the big picture, see every facet of a problem or a solution. Where if you only have the same people with the same perspective, then you're only going to see one aspect of that, and you could really be missing out as you build your team. I'm going to use a couple of examples now. Obviously, when you go to do a pub quiz. And I love that, although maybe not quite as many attended in the last couple of years as I would have liked. If you have everybody there as a sports expert, you're all going to fail on the music round and you're not going to succeed as a team. Equally, the other way, if everybody's really hot on their music or their history, but they don't know anything about sport, well, going to fall down there as well, because obviously we are a nation of sport lovers as well. So that's a good example. I think another one that's quite relevant as well is the example of the England squad for Euro 2021. And not just was the diversity on the pitch, which is really great, and obviously the team that they were able to pull together was one of the most diverse that's been fielded in recent years, but they were also very diverse off the pitch as well. So Gareth Southgate had a lot of slightly unconventional consultants and advisors to the team that maybe would have batted a few eyebrows at the time. However, if you think about it, it makes sense. Gareth Southgate obviously knows a hell of a lot about football. A lot of the people around him would have also known a lot about football. So they're seeing one perspective and one facet of a problem. But what he did, and I think one of the reasons that they were able to be one of the most successful teams that we fielded in recent times, is actually they had very diverse consultants, which included an educational theorist, a cycling coach. Sandhurst's first female commander was there, as was a former table tennis champion. And all of these inputs and insights from the different experiences and backgrounds of those consultants were really able to help the team find innovation through like mental resilience, and including team selection, and actually introducing new approaches to what has been very, very successful team. So those are some good examples. So where do we find equity in recruitment? Because obviously that was one of the title of the topic was in equity and recruitment. So when it comes to recruitment, there are some examples there on items where diversity and equity are sometimes focused on. So you've got things like age and gender and socioeconomic backgrounds. Some of the things also would include like education level, and I know that's something that crops up quite a lot as well. There seems to be two types of elements here where we come across different diversity requirements, and one of them is inherent diversity, such as age, race, things that you really can't change. But then there are other elements that are required diversity, which is experience and education level, values and skills. And actually you can end up having diversity bias with both of those things. So how do you address this when it comes to recruitment? As you can see there, sometimes making sure that you audit the language that you use in job adverts so that you don't inadvertently exclude a particular group. Making sure that you actually seek candidates from different locations. If you only ever go to the same job boards and share with the same recruitment agencies, you may well inadvertently be reducing the pool of candidates in ways that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Sometimes it's worth looking at rethinking some of the screening factors that you're looking for as well, that you might inadvertently be excluding some of the more diverse applicants from it. Making sure that your company ethos is appealing, and I think that's really key everywhere in post-COVID age, because actually people have gotten a lot more used to flexible working, work from home, and are a lot less likely to accept positions that don't align with their personal branding as well. A couple of other ways of trying to enhance the diversity within recruitment is obviously actually encouraging referrals from your diverse hires that are already within your organization. And also an interesting one of the use of blind CVs in interviews, so that the inherent bias that we all have is maybe taken away there. There's a number of interesting anecdotes of people inadvertently being mistaken for the other gender and getting treated quite differently because of it, as an example there. Let's carry on. One item as well. So this is something that Insono has recently signed up to, and it's called the Tech Talent Charter. And it's just a point that we are going to be committed to this more diverse hiring and supporting employees through the diversity and inclusion initiatives. So it's really important as an entire organization that we embrace this. I think one thing to note as well is that it doesn't stop once you get them in the door. Recruitment is obviously really important, and there has been a lot of work done the last decade or two to actually increase diverse hires. But does it stop there? What happens when you've made that diverse hire in whatever aspect it is? I mean, I know for me personally in this space, right? So I am a young female mainframe expert. So I'm not necessarily the norm. I'm not entirely diverse. I don't have any disabilities. I'm not of a racial minority. So there are definitely items that don't challenge me, but I know personally there are some that do make me a diverse candidate when it comes to the space that I work in. So the first day on a new job, you've got that new hire in, they're super excited, they're happy to have their new job. There's a reason they accepted the job in the first place. They're looking for ways to prove themselves, looking for that career progression. How do they get involved in their new job? That first day of a new hire, you're really open, and they're very positive, looking forward to things that they can get involved in, and how are they going to succeed in their job. Now, hopefully everything goes well there, but it doesn't always. A lot of the time, it then ends up on the last day. They've been there. It doesn't necessarily happen in a week. Maybe it does. Maybe it happens in 3 months, 6 months, 2 years. Maybe they stick it out for 2 years before getting to the point where they go, I don't belong here. If you haven't implemented good retention strategies for these new hires, you risk them becoming disconnected from your organization. Do you have good recognition policies? How is your progression steps, especially for new, younger hires into, for example, the mainframe space? It can be quite challenging to come into that new job as a relatively inexperienced person and be able to see the steps of your career that gets you to where your colleagues are that are very experienced. You've been doing it for 30 years. Well, how do I, as that new hire, get there? If you don't, as an organization or a team, have good progression or training paths, career ladders, it can lead to members feeling like there is nowhere to go, feeling a bit trapped and stifled. You go, well, if there's no growth here, why am I here? One of the other things that isn't always talked about, but I think is also quite important in this aspect, is actually lower productivity output. So even if these diverse hires don't talk with their feet, for example, by actually leaving the job for something else, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not being less productive than what they could be. So by having disengaged members of staff, if they don't feel that they're part of the team, part of the organization, because of the lack of diversity and inclusion initiatives in there, well, they might just disengage, carry on collecting their paycheck, but they're not putting their all in, they're not sharing those new innovative ideas that they could come up with. Oh, excuse me, I've not spoken for this long in quite a while. So what can we do for strategies for retention? So obviously there's a lot of different items you can talk about. So we're going to look to start with as what you can do as a colleague. You have someone new joining your team. What can you do to help them feel included and help try and retain them within both your team and within the industry as a whole? So some of the big things here are actually quite simple. You just welcome them. Make sure that you you talk to them and you include them. Things like sharing the spotlight. So actually making sure that when they do something good, or when they've helped you on a project that has been successful for you, that you say, oh, actually they helped me with this as well. Oh, goodness me. Make sure that you are aware of your own biases and that you limit the assumptions that you put on new people coming in. And also be able to be aware of managing up if you see a leader that could be more inclusive. So some things that can be quite a challenge as well is trying to limit some of the inside jokes, inside references. I mean, in mainframe space, it can be quite a challenge when terminology is quite specific. So the first time you use an acronym, actually explaining what it is, which for us mainframers can be quite difficult because we don't always know what it means. We don't know what the TLA actually stands for, but being able to explain to your new hires when things that you're used to, just being open about it, trying not to exclude other people for whatever reason, just because they turned down the option to work with you or to socialize with you at one point doesn't mean that they're going to do it again. So just being open and friendly and helping as new people come on board. So obviously we'll move on to the next one. Things you do as a team leader. So obviously it's slightly different because you do have a responsibility to both your business and the individual employee. So some of the things here are actually by leading by example, being open to change when new ideas are proposed, actually being able to embrace that and actually rejecting that's how it's always been done. Again, can be difficult with some things in the mainframe space because maybe you actually were involved in the decision-making process of when it was originally made. 15, 20 years ago, a decision was made. You've carried on following that decision path for the last 15 years, and that's just how it's always been done. Well, actually, if you were to make that decision again today, would you make the same choice? Does following down how it's always been done, is that actually being beneficial both to your team and your organization? So one of the other items here as a team leader that I think is really important is actually making sure that you check in with all of your team members, including the quiet ones. It can be quite difficult, the new hire, especially as a diverse hire, if your opinion is different from the rest of the groups. Do you challenge it, or do you stay quiet and just, well, I'll keep my opinion to myself? And that can be really detrimental to an organization, even if you've managed to make that diverse hire. If they don't feel safe enough in their environment to share their different perspective, you're not benefiting as an organization from that different point of view. So making sure you as a team leader do check in, either offline in front of the rest of your team, whichever way makes you and the individual feel most comfortable, to try and gather some of those different opinions. So I think those are important things as a team leader, because you are in that position of authority. So you do need to be very open, limiting your assumptions and actually promoting the growth opportunities for these diverse hires as well. So over on, some of the other things, what can you do as HR? Now, obviously, in this instance, you're typically disconnected on a day-to-day basis from the individual hire that you've made. However, there are things that you can implement within your organization that help with the retention of the diverse hires. Making sure that you have regular touch points, especially early on in the hiring process, so that the individual doesn't feel cut adrift. I think that's especially important in the last couple of years, as more people are working remotely. They don't necessarily get to touch every day with the organization as a whole. They work with their immediate colleagues and maybe their team leaders, but it can be quite easy to feel like you've joined a new organization but not be part of it. Making sure that you're flexible to the individual requirements. That's as we said earlier, equity and equality are not the same thing. If individuals have particular requirements, maybe in terms of flexibility, being open to that, because you do need to make sure that the diverse pool of candidates and employees within your team, they are all bringing something different to it. Some of the other things that I do think are interesting, they come up, is bias awareness. So we've all been had to do those annual awareness training videos, and there's definitely been some discussion in recent years as to how valuable those actually are. I think there's two facets to that. One is, if you are not aware of your bias, you cannot change it. Therefore, having bias awareness is valuable, in that until you are aware of it, there is nothing you can do about it. So having those awareness trainings where you realize, well, actually, maybe I do have an inherent bias one way or the other, that is the first step to change. You are not responsible for your first reaction to a thing, a person, a situation, but you are responsible for your second thought and the way in which you choose to react to it. So any actions you take, the first thought you can't have control over necessarily, but you can absolutely choose to change the actions that you take from that. So I do think that there is value in that bias awareness training. But as we all know, if you only do half an hour once a year, that's not going to instill any long-term change. So looking for ways of actively changing, so that you don't let hiring managers, hiring teams unconsciously let their bias take hold when it's part of recruitment and retention, I think is very important. One item here that's interesting is culture fit. You can go through all of the diverse hiring mechanisms, but if your final one is culture fit, how do we think this person is going to get on with the rest of the team? You have to be slightly careful with that, because it could potentially lead to non-diverse teams. You don't want, oh well, we only get on with people because they all have the same sense of humor. Well, that is limiting the diversity within those individual teams, and it can be a challenge. So not saying that culture fit isn't important, because obviously you don't want to necessarily disrupt and upset an entire team with a new hire, but at the same time, you can't get change, you can't get those new perspectives and those innovative ideas unless you do keep that culture changing. So that's an interesting one. So it's kind of coming to the end. So the 3 key takeaways I think we need to have for the situation is that actually it is everybody's responsibility in terms of diversity in recruitment and retention. Obviously, not all of us get involved in the actual recruitment process, but if you are a hiring manager who has to write the job description, maybe look at the terminology you're using as part of the requirements. But it is everybody's responsibility as part of retention. And by retention, I don't necessarily mean retention within your organization as well. In the mainframe space, we are having skills issues, and IT is particularly the gender balance, for example, not quite where we would like it to be. But if you don't make it your responsibility to encourage diversity within your teams and within the within the industry as a whole, it won't change. Like I said, retention of diverse hires is as important as recruitment. I personally think it's possibly more so, because HR has been doing great things when it comes to trying to find diverse talent, and diversity in hires has been discussed for a number of years, but it's very easy to forget once you've onboarded those new diverse hires. Well, how do you keep them? And also making sure you share your knowledge and experience, and by that I do mean including your career path, because within some of our teams, diversity can just be as much as an age thing as all of the other things we talk about, right? We talk about gender, we talk about race, but actually in some of our teams there is an age discrepancy as well. So being able to share your career path, experience and knowledge around how would a new younger team member navigate their entire career path for the next 20 years, because they're only seeing you a lot further on in their career, and they're not seeing those little steps that were made by you every 2 or 3 years within your career. Where are they seeing their next career step? If they can't see it, they might just go, you know what, this isn't for me. I'm going to go somewhere where there is an easier career path, an easier progression. I mean, I've seen it with some of my colleagues. They've moved out into sales or out of organization entirely, out of the industry entirely, becoming chefs or something else. Now, that's great for them following passions, but we are missing some of that retention. So you never know, you might inspire the next generation with 1 or 2 little stories of how you got to where you are today. So I'm going to say thank you, and any questions or thoughts? And Eileen, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Claire. That was actually really interesting. And I think I may have some questions for you as well. I'm actually going to let people unmute themselves because given that it's quite a small group, I think that makes more sense. Misty did have a question in the chat earlier, saying, could you give some examples of language in the job advert that might accidentally exclude diverse candidates? And also, could you give examples of screening factors that should be avoided?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the language, it can be a bit challenging. So I am going to use one example of actual experience levels. So obviously, everybody wants to hire really experienced people. The more skilled, the better. But if you're adamant that you need 15 years of experience to do something of a particular thing, well, you are excluding a huge swathe of people from that. I mean, I know anecdotally of situations where job adverts have said we need 10 years of experience in a product that's only been in existence for 7 years. Well, that's not really helpful. And people automatically exclude themselves in some of those situations as well. Something else that I do find interesting is actually, if you have to instill attendance in an office every day, for example, then you are inadvertently creating the bias of people within commuting distance. So in some instances, if the office is in a particular type of location, you're only going to get a particular type of people applying because they have to be within that half hour, 40 minutes, hour commute time. But I know those are just small examples. There will be lots of other examples out there in terms of ways of structuring the language. I mean, even in terms of some things like work hard, play hard. I don't like it as a comment, but those types of things will get people, diverse people who maybe value their home life a lot, might go, you know what, I don't need that. That sounds a lot of work. And actually I go to work and I work and I'm fine with it, but I don't need it to take up my entire life, which means you're losing perspective of people who focus a lot on their family or spend a lot of time on some of their hobbies that are very important to them, and they will be getting skills and experience of other things through the experiences they have outside of work. So yeah, those are a few of my opinions. Any more?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Wesley. Can you all hear me?
Yep,
Yeah,
go on,
we can
Wesley.
hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know if I was still on mute. I have seen so much about it within companies that will give you a bonus if you recruit somebody good into the company.
Mm.
And I can understand where that comes from. And yet at the same time, I suspect it's leading people to recruit people like themselves.
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
Any thoughts on that, please?
No, and I think that is a very interesting thing. It is a challenge there, because actually having a referral can be very valuable for organizations, because it is more likely to be a successful hire if it's been referred. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is people aren't going to refer people that they don't want to work with. I quite happily worked with this person before, either in a previous role or on a project or something like that, and you go, actually no, they were really good, absolutely be happy to work with them again. They're not going to be recommending people who rubbed them up the wrong way or challenged them, and that can be detrimental to the organization. I think it's probably something we struggle with quite a bit in the mainframe space, because of how tight-knit and small the community is here in the UK, kind of everybody knows everybody, and has worked with them at some point. So actually getting those referrals can be as much about finding the people at the right time. So when they are looking for a move, right? Because not everyone's always looking or open at every opportunity. But you're right, it can absolutely just lead to people hiring others just like themselves, and then you end up with a team of carbon copy individuals, and that you do lack that diversity. However, it does go the other way a little bit, encouraging your already diverse hires to do some of those recommendations can help.
Yeah.
So getting your female employees to recommend other females, and maybe that'll help. I mean, I can't come up with all the answers, unfortunately. If I could, that would be great. But no, you're absolutely right. It is a challenge, and it's probably one that needs addressing within organisations as well.
I worked for a place, excuse me, many years ago in the IT sector, where not only were they very homogenous in terms of age, race, disability, it was virtually all men, and I noticed they were all short. They had the CEO was short, and he'd hired all people who were about his height or smaller.
That is impressive.
Yes. And I thought, what's do they even, it was so obvious to me at 5'2", but
certainly swimming in the shallow end of the pool there.
yes. Well, otherwise we'd drown.
I've got one comment, well, a couple actually. Firstly, hello, hi.
Hi.
Claire, you
Hi,
were
Margaret.
fantastic. That was really good. And I've learned a lot, and I'm really glad I attended this session. You were brilliant. And when you talked about unconscious bias, you said you can choose to change your second thought.
Yeah.
And that made me think of something I heard a long time ago, not necessarily about unconscious bias, but it definitely applies. So I'll be making notes. Yes, you can choose your second thought, and you sometimes can't choose your first thought. But if you can make the time between your first thought and your action, or your first thought and your second thought shorter, then you can affect the first thought in the first place.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
you don't get the original first thought. Your first thought will be more positive.
Absolutely, and I think that's relevant. It not just in our professional life. I think it's absolutely relevant in everyday life as well. I mean, how many times do you walk down the street and you see someone wearing quite colourful or extravagant outfits or makeup, and your first thought is one that isn't necessarily very positive. Actually, I mean, I know I find myself doing that on occasion and instantly regret it, because that first thought, I can't change it. It's unfortunate that is where I go to, but as soon as I thought that, I go, well, that's not nice, that's inappropriate. What was the need for that? And by shortening that space, eventually I hope that the second thought will become the first thought.
Precisely, yeah. I also feel a bit guilty because I hadn't considered coming to this session, but I'm so glad I did. So thanks.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things, especially in a conference such as the GSE. It is very technical. People attend it for the technical skills, expanding knowledge of particular areas that they work with on a day-to-day basis, they wouldn't necessarily think of taking the time out to come to a more diverse and thought-provoking type topic, rather than a technical learning skills increase one, which is
information based.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think information you can find on Google, but the thought-provoking discussion is possibly of more value, but then I'm the one talking about it. So
you've actually got a really good point there, because when was it? September, end of September, there was a mainframers meetup, which is quite relaxed, and who was on it? Sophie Green, or Sophie Rogers now. She was on it, and I managed to get Melissa Sassy involved, and she and I talked about imposter syndrome in the mainframe community. And it doesn't matter how old you are or how long you've been in the industry, you can still suffer from imposter syndrome, and I felt that. And there were some really passive aggressive comments, like, I thought this was supposed to be a mainframe session. Where's the technical content? Said, well, working in industry, particularly the tech industry, isn't all about SMF records. It's about people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I had originally wanted to talk about imposter syndrome here, but Resley's doing an amazing session on that later, so we didn't want to have two things on the same topic.
Sorry, Claire.
That's all right. As long as someone's talking about it, it doesn't have to be me, but I definitely have opinions on it, because it is very real. And I mean, again, just a personal opinion here, and I think maybe a little bit backed up by what you just said there, Marcus. Sometimes in the mainframe space, our soft skills are not always there. And we are great when it comes to the bits and bytes, the SMF records, actually do hands-on keyboards things, but it's one of the reasons that we sometimes get sidelined, even within our organization in terms of strategy, because we are not able to connect on a social, emotional level to our managers, the decision makers within our organization. And it's unfortunate, because actually our technology suffers for that as well. So some of these soft skill sessions for technical teams, I think, are really important. I don't mean to offend anybody at all by that statement, and I really hope I don't. But it can be interesting. You step foot into a meeting, a room full of mainframers, and it can be quite interesting. A little bit of as you say, everybody being short.
Yes.
It can be a little bit. I mean, no offense, Marcus, but the bold and glasses, I think, works quite well, doesn't it?
When I was doing a keynote at GSC.
Well.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Oh, there we go. No, years ago, I did a keynote at GSC. Well, I've done lots of keynotes at GSC, but in this one, I was telling the story of Sully, the captain who landed his plane on the Hudson. And this hand shot up in the front row. And I invited the person to speak, and he said, I know the call number for the plane.
Yeah.
I said, what is it?
What?
He told me, and then he said, I know the call code for the airport that he was flying to and from. I said, well, what are those? And then he said, I know the call codes for every airport in North America. And I thought, I love his enthusiasm. I love that he wants to get involved.
Yeah.
And I was fine with it, although I'm thinking this is timed to the minute. But there's something really beautiful happened. Is I made him promise to come and talk to me about it afterwards, and he did. And I said, I could sense the discomfort in the room. So I said, only at this conference. And people laughed in acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And what I noticed also is that he and a lot of other folks who sort of similar in terms of the social skills are absolutely loved at GRC. And they're taken under the wing and protected and looked after. And I would love for there to be ways outside GSC in other settings for people who maybe fit the kind of mainframey stereotype in terms of social skills, or maybe being a little on the spectrum or something, for them to be loved and appreciated and accepted and celebrated who they are, instead of criticized for not being suave.
Yeah, and actually, I think this is one of the items where diversity within teams becomes really important as well. So by having individuals like that who are really enthusiastic, super detail knowledgeable about something really weird, right? Great. And they can absolutely bring loads of things. But if you're able to have a team around them that adds those different items, the social skills, the other anything, different perspective on things. So it's not that you don't value what they've got, because they absolutely have insights and their passion is great, but maybe the way they present it isn't amazing. Well, pair them up with someone who's presenting is amazing but doesn't have that detail knowledge. You put them together, and as a team, then they bring the best of both. They've got all of that detail and that passion within there, and someone who's got more of the presenter and the social skills, and together as a team, that is where the magic happens.
Yeah, I like that.
I loved your pub quiz analogy, because you're not going to win if you're all clones of each other.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I am terrible at music round. I hear a music song and I'm like, oh, I've definitely heard of that before, but I can't tell you who wrote it or the name of it. And sport, not really my thing, but tech, science and history, I can probably manage those ones. So I have to be on a team where there's people who care about music and sport, because without that, my team was always going to lose. So
and maybe an important thing too is to, if we have a diverse team, to avoid thinking of each other as like, oh, and he's the Asian on the team, and he's the older white guy, and she's the young hotshot, and
I mean, the thing with that is that those are all very shallow and superficial comments, really, aren't they? They're not really helpful. But we absolutely have people on our teams who are an expert in a particular area. You'll have people who you go, you know what, I always run my writing past this person, because they're able to make it flow, wordsmith it a bit better. I can pull the details together, but I'll give it to someone else and they make it sound beautiful. And there's going to be bits and pieces. I mean, even technology, like you go to the Kix person for Kix things, and DB2 for DB2 things, and no one goes to networking because there is no one. So, but yeah, and absolutely, and one of the things as well, and I'm going to go back to the slide I had on Gareth Southgate's football team. I think this is an interesting point as well. This team didn't have a whole heap of super well-known hotshots that are the stars. They didn't have a load of rock stars in it. Whereas from what I've heard, as not a football follower myself, but apparently in previous years, they've had that. They've had 2 or 3, 4 maybe, really, really big names, very, very skilled. But you know what? They all play the same position. So you can't have them all on the pitch at the same time. And if you do put them all on the pitch at the same time, they don't work together, because they're all trying to fill the same role. And that leads to competition that is unhealthy. It leaves spaces on the pitch open to attack by the other team. They leave weaknesses in their line, because they've only focused on one skills area. I mean, I personally saw it as well. I was playing netball, and I was watching the Netball World Cup a couple of years ago, and there was one team that had a particularly tall shooter, so it made it quite easy. Like, she could just pick the ball up and put it in the net. But the whole team had been built and focused around this one player, and her only thing was the fact that she was head and shoulders taller than everybody else on the court. Now, actually, she wasn't that agile. She wasn't that fast, able to get into position. But if she stood still in the right spot and they were able to get the ball to her, she could get it in every time. But that meant that the rest of the team had to adapt their play style just for that one. And it was interesting. And it worked for them with some matches, but it didn't do them well in terms of the whole competition. So, I mean, making sure that the whole team is complementary for each other and built together, rather than necessarily just focusing around the rock star, I think is an interesting discussion point as well.
I can see that Jeff wants to get in and say something, and I'm going to make that the last comment because we've just come up to 10 o'clock.
I'll be very quick. I've been meaning to say, can you hear me first of all?
Yeah,
we can.
Yeah, good. I only called in at the session at the last moment, and I've been dying to get in a few points. First of all, the bits I saw, Claire, fantastic. Some of the points you've raised in the discussion, I can see a lot of it certainly in my own circumstances, and it really is frustrating. But one of the things I wanted to just say, given time is limited, Claire, you forget you supported me when we did the abseil in the Forth Bridge for changing faces.
How could I forget, Jeff? You sent the photo through at the weekend.
I know, and I was going to say to you, it was 6 years ago since you helped me and supported Changing Faces, which is all about, basically helping people with let's just say differences, and a very good presentation. So thank you, and thank you for your support 6 years ago as well.
Yeah, no worries, Jeff. Great. Well, back over to you, Eileen.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was an absolutely brilliant session. Really, really enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot. So our next session, surprisingly enough, I know everybody here, is going to be shocked and surprised. It is the panel discussion. We don't want equality, we want equity. And that is session 4AB at 10:30. So we're going to close the room now, and we'll see you all back then. Thank you so much for putting up the feedback slide. This session was sponsored by Macro4, so thanks to them. The charities which could really do with donations are the RNLI and Guide Dogs for the Blind, both brilliant, brilliant charities. Please remember to do your feedback. If you do it now, you're done, and then it's like sitting there. I don't know if anyone here needs CPD cert, but the feedback goes towards that. It also gets entered into a competition. And thank you so much for everybody who showed up today. 9 o'clock in the morning is kind of early, but it's good that we were all here. So I'm hoping I'll see you all in like 15, 20 minutes.
Yep.
Right, cheers.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you,
Claire. Cheers.
Thank you.
Well done. So we'll see you all in a while. I've got to end the room now so that we can reset it. All righty.
Bye, folks.
So see you in a while.